Well, thank you all for joining us here today for this podcast. I have one of our favorite guests, Leila Rafi, a good friend and somebody that I was looking forward to having on this podcast. Over the years, we've spent a lot of time together from business meetings to fun dinners, and I was excited for everything that Leila has to share. So, Leila, welcome to the podcast, and Firing on All Syllables is excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Gary. I'm so happy to be here.
So, Leila, I know some of this will be redundant for me personally, but for our audience, especially the ones that don't get to know you really well, tell us a bit about who Leila Rafi is, your sort of your upbringing and your journey to being the successful lawyer that you are today.
Okay, sure. So I was actually born in Iran. So I was born in the capital of Iran in Tehran back in November 1978. And that's around the time the revolution was starting to happen. And so in May of 79, my parents left the country, thinking they would be back in a couple of months. And that was 44 and a half years ago. So we haven't been back. We ended up in a few different places in Europe, and then in Washington, and then in Vancouver, and then finally in Toronto by the time I started in grade one. So I kind of think of myself as being raised in Toronto. I always wanted to be a lawyer, so that happened when I was 3 or 4 years old. And I was true to that goal. And I worked hard, and I finally got to the goal that I wanted. And midway along my studies, my parents moved back to Vancouver for my dad's work, took them out there, and I stayed back in Toronto and I did an exchange at UBC after a couple of years. But Toronto's really my home, so I always knew I would want to practice here and live here and just have all my roots in Toronto. So Toronto is where I always will be.
And Leila, the I think the especially having moved only at a few months old, then you really are a true Torontonian by every definition.
Mhm.
But who had your biggest impact in your life growing up? I mean, considering the journey and sort of everything that has happened.
Yeah, I would say it's probably my mom. My mom and I are quite different people, different personalities. She's quite private and introverted, and I'm very extroverted. But I've learned a lot about people who are introverted and more private through her. I also think she's one of the most confident, secure people I know. She certainly is not fussed by what people think, and she is quite sure of who she is and what her expectations are of the people around her. And so I would say I learned a lot from her. She's very street smart as well. So she typically can read people immediately upon meeting them. That's a skill I still don't have. But she kind of made the biggest impact in my career. And she's always been my biggest supporter. So at times in my career that have been more difficult or challenging than others, or in my personal life, she's always kind of reminded me that I'm able to tackle any challenge or any obstacle that may be in my way. So she and I are extremely close, but it's funny because we're so differently wired.
Well, having met her, albeit briefly, Leila, that was my guess that she probably had the biggest impact, and I think that's an extremely accurate description of her. So that's that's
Yeah, she knows her stuff.
and one of the things I often ask is, what did you want to be growing up? But very few people had figured it out at 3, 4 years old who wanted to be a lawyer, much like yourself. So that was actually that had the answer built in. So I loved it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take away the
No,
question.
no, not
It's
at
it's
all.
a
It's
funny thing. There are no lawyers in my family. Most of the folks in my family are engineers or scientists. We have one person that went and studied film. But I like the idea of law because I thought it was a lot of reading and arguing, and in my mind it was going to court. So I didn't really end up going to court, but that kind of changed along the way. But I knew that I wanted to be, in a career where I could read and argue and debate, and I thought law made the most sense. And I was fairly sure of it. And I remember one of my friends in high school, he said, "You're the only person that I met in high school who knew what you wanted to do and did exactly that." And I told him, well, I knew a long time before high school. That was just, years later, but I was pretty certain. So nothing really swayed me off of that.
So see, your mom did rub off on you. You did know early on who you were and what you wanted to be. So all right.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Very true.
I know before we go sort of to your professional path, what are some of your hobbies? Some of the things you like to do for fun?
Well, I love to travel, so I'm very lucky because my work allows me the opportunity to travel quite a bit. So I absolutely love traveling just because I think, seeing different parts of the world, learning different cultures, meeting new people, like that really expands your mind, um, and your ability to really connect with people that are different than you. So traveling is my probably favorite. It's my favorite pastime. And then I'm quite social, so I really like seeing friends. So whether we're going out for dinner or a drink or a walk or just that connection with people is really important to me. Um, Unfortunately, I like to shop, so that means, I have to work as hard as possible for as long as possible. But I like doing those types of things, and then I read a lot. So, I read for work, but then I read a lot in my outside life as well. So I'm always reading a different novel, and I'm part of a couple of book clubs, including one for professional development with a bunch of U.S. Female lawyers, and so that's really important, I think, for development. And I do a lot of reading as well. I'm trying to work out and exercise, but that I'm not as committed to that as I am to other things. But that's kind of a new thing that happened in COVID just to stay healthy. So I'm learning the ropes around the gym. No pun intended.
Fair enough. Well, it's and as I if I were to be a betting person, I was going to guess travel was going to be the first one, and I'm glad my bet would have been correct.
It would have been correct. Travel by far is my favorite pastime, and I've just been blessed and lucky enough to do so much of it.
As is mine, Leila. So it's always something I really appreciate, and also appreciate that we're fortunate to be able to do it. So that's
Yeah,
always
for sure. We've exchanged photos before on travel
exactly.
trips. You've gone to some very neat places that I've never been to. So there are huge areas of the world that I've never um, ventured in that I hope to soon. Australia and Asia. I'm supposed to go to Australia in October for work, so that should be quite interesting because I'll probably tack on a few days for a vacation just because it's so far away. So I wouldn't want to go just to a conference and come right home. But we'll see. Hopefully, there's still time to do much of everything.
When one thing I hear consistently, that whenever I interview people that are sort of more mature in their career, further ahead, they say, "Look, do it now, do it when you can. Don't wait
Yeah.
for retirement. Don't wait for a particular. Just sneak it in when you can, because time is what happens while you're making other plans."
Yeah, it's true. Time really is what happens when you're making other plans and life changes. Health and wealth is not always guaranteed. And sometimes things happen that you don't expect. And then you're not able to have the flexibility to travel as easily as you could before. So there'll always be more work. There'll always be more deadlines. There'll always be more transactions. So it's just a matter of like managing, which I think I do better now that I'm a little more senior in my career. When I was younger, I don't think I did a very good job of managing my time or balancing my time. I still did everything. I just cut my sleep. And, I was a bit of a soldier at work when I was a young lawyer. So it's nice to have just a little bit more control over my practice, which happens as you get more senior.
So, Leila, that sets me up nicely for my next question to you. So, there's a
Okay.
lot of listeners that know you or know you socially a little bit, or have heard of you, and they're like, "What was Leila's career like? I want to know how it evolved." So, take us through a bit of through your journey and your career and some of the more pivotal moments in your career that brought you to where you are today.
Sure. So I had always wanted to be, a lawyer that goes to court. So a litigator, I think, was in my mind as as what a lawyer actually is. And so when I was a summer student, I worked on a transaction in the securities and capital markets group. And I really liked the transaction and I liked the adrenaline and I liked, having it in the newspaper and all that kind of stuff. And so I changed my interest and it became more capital markets and securities focused, which is surprising because I didn't have a business background, didn't have an economics degree or an MBA, which I think is useful if you're going into securities or capital markets. I started my practice at Blake Castles. So my first day as a lawyer was at Blake Castles, and the market was so good at the time that the firm had hired six lateral lawyers. So lawyers that had never actually worked as a lawyer but had finished their articling at a different firm. And they started with the Blake summer and articling students the same day. And so I worked at Blake's for a couple of years. It wasn't the right environment for me. And I worked across from McCarthy's, and then McCarthy's recruited me. They just got interested in me and they offered me a job, and I decided to go. I felt like I could probably excel in a different environment at the time. For me, it was important to be able to like connect with people I worked with and, have a bit of a diversity in the people I was working with, like men and women and older and younger. And so I decided to move to McCarthy's. At that point, there was a woman who worked there that I had worked across a transaction on early on in my career, and she was fairly happy at McCarthy's, and so I went there and I spent, I guess, 9 years at McCarthy's, and so I learned quite a bit. I was given a lot of challenging work. There was a set of partners who gave me consistent work opportunities, and I worked very hard, and I received great bonuses, and I flew into income partnership early, and I was quite happy to have the opportunities that I did. I also worked in Calgary for a brief stint on a transaction that ended up dying, but I stayed out in Calgary for a few months just because the Calgary office was very busy at the time. But I was very grateful for all those opportunities. I struggled as an income partner. It's a tough kind of spot to be in any law firm because you're not really an associate, but you're not an equity partner. And so neither group kind of thinks of you as one of their own. So you're in this kind of middle period that some have called purgatory. It's not a easy place to be. And so I was in income partnership. I was working for a key client of the firm on a huge modernization, and it was more corporate private M&A work, and that's kind of not my specialty. Like what I really love is capital markets and securities work. And so it pulled me a little bit away from my interest. And so, as I got deferred a few times, I realized I needed to make a change, and I thought a new work environment would be good and would expose me to different opportunities. And almost a decade had passed, and I had learned as much as I could. I felt at McCarthy's, and so I made the difficult decision of transitioning my practice. Which at that time was focused on this key client, and so I got the opportunity at McMillan through meeting who is now the managing partner of McMillan, Tim Murphy. And him and I just connected very easily because we're very similar and we have similar personalities. And I met the head of the capital markets group, Paul Davis, and we connected very easily, and he gave me a chance. He gave me a platform. I told the firm that I didn't have a huge book of business because I had been working with this key client, so I didn't make any false promises. And I moved into McMillan, which is kind of unique because it was maybe 9, 10 years into my practice. And so people do that more often now than they used to, but many times they do that when they have a practice. And so um, I really felt supported at McMillan, and that people believed in me, I guess. And so it took me a few years to kind of get going, but I was able to build a book of business, and the firm handed me some existing business, and so after 3 or 4 years, I really had a practice. And so I'm super grateful to McMillan and particularly to Paul Davis and Margaret McNee, who's now retired, just because they really encouraged me to grow and seek out new opportunities. And it was just a great refresh for me going into, a different environment. I still have a lot of great friends at McCarthy's, and I see them often and I talk to them often. But for me, it was like a great move for my career and for my career development. And so, it's interesting. Some lawyers will stay at the same firm forever, and that may work for them. And then other people may move. And so it really depends on your circumstances and the type of work you're doing and who you're working with. And like one thing I learned throughout the course of my law career is that you can't plan or control every single thing that'll happen, because things will happen that will surprise you, disappoint you, um, positive things, negative things, like all kinds of things. And so you just have to be able to kind of adapt and be resilient and keep going, because sometimes you might not get what you want, or might not get it in the time frame that you want, and you have to kind of decide what's going to work best for you, because law is a very difficult area. It's not an easy profession. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. And so if you're unhappy in your practice, it's that much more difficult to actually have a meaningful practice and work the hours that are expected of you. It just, bleeds into so many aspects of your life that you have to kind of like what you do, and be in an environment where you think you can thrive. And that may be different for everyone at different times of their career. I guess that's the most important thing to remember, because my career has had a lot of twists and turns in it. But I think I've finally found the right spot.
Well, and I think the even the twists and turns, Leila, relatively normal. I think especially to your point, it is becoming the pivoting in within different firms and sort of finding the right platform is becoming a bit more the norm than it perhaps was even 10 years ago when certain lawyers would be have their entire career at one firm. So I think that's
Yeah, for sure. Like when I started out, I think it wasn't as common in 2005 or 6 to have worked at two or three firms or even four firms. But now, all these years later, it's almost uncommon to find someone who's been at one firm the entire time. And I think, the younger generation or the more junior generation, because some of them may be older but mature students, like they actually are quicker to make decisions. Like I don't think loyalty to a particular firm is the same as when I was coming up. Like they're very much more cognizant of what will make them happy, what they want. They do usually want balance in their life with work and life. Like I haven't totally figured that out yet. I'm still working on it, but I just find that they're stronger in their views in terms of where they want to be. And I think part of that is good, because not everybody wants to be a partner at a law firm. That no longer is a carrot that works for everyone. There's lots of people who want alternative career paths, but they want to still work in a firm and have access to many different clients, and the firms have had to adjust and kind of create those paths for everyone, because if they don't, they're going to lose all their good people. So it's just everything is transitioned in terms of people's expectations and goals, and it's been quite a learning process for me. I mean, now I feel a bit old when I look at the people that come through as students and younger lawyers, but it really only has been, you know 15 to 20 years.
well, you are not old. I can tell you that. So it's the
That's good. Thanks,
just,
Gary. You might
just
you might be conflicted, but you might be biased.
I am not, but the one thing that is interesting is it's also a lesson for law firm leadership as well, because retaining lawyers now in sort of this environment, including at the partnership level, is probably more important than it's ever been in Canadian
Yes.
legal history. So that's
Yes, for
uh,
sure.
and it's our evolution of the legal industry, and it's something that we should all be mindful of.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? I think almost all the firms are um, interested in what their people have to say, particularly with COVID, and what happened with George Floyd and the world. understanding that diversity and inclusion and equity matters, and that people have to be treated with respect and be treated well. I think, a lot of firms have tried to gather feedback from their lawyers, from their legal professionals, from their staff, to make the firm environment a better one. So, one of our goals at McMillan is to make the firm a great place to work for everyone. And that means something different to everyone depending on their, history, age, demographic, culture, a whole bunch of different things. And so I do think law firms have started to think about those things. Sometimes the legal industry is behind every other industry, but I'm proud to say it's actually things are changing, and so that's a good thing. It was a bit too conservative before, and there wasn't enough diversity, I think, in the legal profession just generally. I mean, it's not something I really thought about when I was coming up. But certainly the more junior people now think about it, talk about it. It's a topic that is discussed at interview level within firms all the time. It's just when I was coming up, nobody really thought about it. It was just, I received a lot of work opportunities. I worked hard at the time. I don't think a lot of thought was put into, gender or this or that. But now it's nice to see that people are thinking things through a bit and making sure that everybody has a good and fair experience, that people are being allocated work, that, we have different types of students who look different and are different. And so we don't have a homogeneous kind of pool anymore, which is nice. And I think that's across every single law firm.
Absolutely. So, Leila, you're an award-winning lawyer. You are an influencer in many ways. You are a professor. Um, what drives you? So, two questions related to what drives you, and how do you balance it? Because I know it's always an everlasting quest for professionals to figure out the balance, but sort of the drive and then the balance.
Yeah, you know what? It's a good question. Like for me, I really love what I do. And so I enjoy working hard. It sounds strange, and some of my friends who are lawyers don't even have a hard time believing it. But I actually really love what I do. I'm so disciplined in my work. And then the teaching, for example, I was given the opportunity by Wendy Locke, who's a partner at McCarthy's, to teach a class or two when she was leading a course at Western. And that just got my appetite going for teaching, and I quite liked it. I was very nervous back then. But when I moved to McMillan, I had the opportunity to apply to teach a full course at Queen's, and it was good. I had a lot of the materials. I was able to put together a course pretty easily. A bunch of my partners helped me mark exams to make it doable, just because the classes were anywhere from 70 to 100 people. So that's quite a bit of work in terms of the exams. But I love being around young people, fresh perspectives. They're so interested in the topic and they ask such good questions. And some of the questions are things I've never even thought about. But it forces me to go back to first principles, and it makes me feel young and relevant. In COVID, it was very tough, I think, for the university students because nobody wants to learn securities laws on a camera with Zoom, as exciting as it is. It's very hard to keep people's interest for 3 hours when you're talking about takeover bids on a computer. Um, but the teaching is something that it comes very naturally to me. So to me, that's not really a chore. It's something I very much enjoy doing. And the other things I do, I'm committed to. Like for a while, I sat on an advisory board for an organization that's driven towards providing networking opportunities to Persian women. One of my friends at Gowlings, Parna Sabat, is a co-founder, and so that was meaningful to me. So when I would go to the events or, talk about ways to fundraise, like that was very important to me, to give opportunities to people in the Iranian community, something I didn't really think much about when I was a younger lawyer. And now I recently got on the Women in Capital Markets Board, which is a fantastic organization I've always been interested in. So I was thrilled that they recruited me to go on their board. Again, like geared towards um, providing tools and resources to women to excel in the financial industry area and the capital markets. So now Women in Capital Markets is called Versify, and that's just an exciting change. And so those things I do on the side of my practice, I love to do. So for me, they're not just like an additional task that takes time away from my outside life. Like a lot of things in my outside life are tied into what I do for my work. And then I'm asked to speak a lot, as you said, on different topics, anywhere from like investor rights to securities laws to gender diversity to corporate governance. And those things I love to do. And typically, again, it's quite natural for me, so I don't find I'm stressed or worried about it. I can be pretty conversational, and so it's almost like a break for me from my like day job and my work and grinding down on paper and pushing out paper. Like if I didn't do those things, I don't think I would be able to be as happy as I am at work, as disciplined as I am. I need to have the other things to just keep me connected to the community. I also think it's important for the younger people. And I'm told that the more I do certain things, like I'm a mentor for U of T, and the women I have mentored through the Women's Association have told me it's very important for them to be able to talk to someone who's a woman who may look like them, who, may have the same interest, and to see my career develop and to be able to access me to ask questions and things like that. I certainly didn't have that coming up, but I didn't think I was missing anything. It's just not something that crossed my mind. So for me, it's very natural, and I just have a curiosity in terms of meeting people and making connections. Like, one time I think I said to my mom when I was a young child, like I was upset that I wouldn't be able to meet every single person in the world during my time. And then my mom gave me such a weird, funny reaction because that would be her nightmare, meeting every single person in the world. But I was stressed out by the fact that like there might not be enough time to meet everyone who lives in the world. So it's just a funny, like that's just me.
It's a funny thing to be worried about as a child, not wanting to meet everybody, but it's also telling of the professionals you are today and being omnipresent and at many
Yeah.
events and the speaking engagements and the involvement. So you're certainly
Yeah.
putting a good dent into the world population meet.
Yeah, I'm trying. I definitely know Bay Street. I can't walk around the path without running into a bunch of people I know. A funny group of people, but I've definitely got that area down.
And I can attest to it. It's I have yet to meet somebody where I'm like, oh, and Leila. There's like, yeah, of course, I met her there, or I have this
Yeah,
story, and it almost always turns into a conversation. So that's
yeah, that's
very
funny.
accurate.
Yeah, I'm everywhere. You can't get rid of me, unfortunately.
No, no, it's a good thing, especially when it builds credibility. The one thing in today's world is we can be really good technical lawyers, and you can have people that are really good at what they do, but humans are in the very nature they build trust with relationships and knowing that you'll
Yeah,
take
I
care.
totally think that's true. And honestly, I think law is about relationships. Like it's no longer, clients are no longer just giving firms work based on their brand without really knowing any of the lawyers on a handshake, charge me $1 million to do this file. Like you have to be in the market, you have to create relationships, you have to just be human. Like sometimes I just think of it as like you have to be human. So, if you have a client who's sad or going through a difficult time, treat them like a human being, like give them some space, or don't hound them on something that's not urgent. Take an interest in their life. I had a client once whose children were being bullied in school, two clients actually who didn't know each other. And so when I would see articles on bullying in the newspaper or otherwise, I would send them. And I would just think if they didn't want to look at them, they could just delete them. But I think those things have a lot of meaning, because if people think that you actually care about them and not just their business, they will start to trust you. And I don't do those things. I had a friend who asked me if I do those things with the intention for people to give me work, like in a strategic manner. And that's that's just not who I am. So, some of my close friends at McCarthy's are now in house and they've given me work. But when I was at McCarthy's, I didn't befriend them because I thought that they would go in house and I wouldn't work there and they would give me work. Like, that's not, it's just this desire to get to know people and see how they tick and get close to people. And so I've just been very lucky that all of a sudden that's become valued in the legal profession, and people now understand relationships matter, and that's a key part of building a trusted advisor relationship. Like, I'm not sure that people made that connection in the past. At least people who weren't rainmakers didn't make that connection, I don't think.
No, and I think, Leila, the real takeaway there is that developing genuine relationships is so key. Not with an
Yeah.
agenda, but just truly caring about people, because that's how you build trust, right? Like,
Yep.
people are not stupid. When you're doing it with an agenda, they can see through it, and when it's done
Yeah,
genuinely,
they
it's
can see
appreciated.
through it. It's very true. And, you know, if you don't know someone and you just call them up and because they get a new job and you try and say, like, give me the work, like, it just, like, where were you through the course of their career? Like, when they left
Exactly.
a firm or when they changed their in-house job, or like, did you care at all about their development, or are you just interested to try and get a piece of the pie now that they've moved? Like, I can't even imagine doing something like that. So, to me, it's just a genuine interest in people's career development and where they end up. And I'm happy to, send them articles about their business or about their industry area, even when I'm not their lawyer, just because I think of them if I read something. And I don't do that with any intention behind it other than it just makes me think of them. And so, it has to be natural, I think. And that's what makes it a lot easier for me, is that I don't really have to think about it.
Well, you're also one of the most responsive people I know via email, I certainly deal with a lot of responsive people. But it's like your response time is it's amazing, and
Yes, it's funny. People call me, I've been called a vampire many times before, by colleagues and people close to me in my outside life, because, like, if you email me at 3 a.m., I may respond at like 3:03 a.m. In any time zone. I'm very fast on my email. Sometimes I have to slow it down, but no one's ever gonna email me and not get a response. Like, if you don't, then there's a reason why I'm not responding, because I'm very responsive. But I always think, clients also want you to be responsive. So even if you have to think something through, it would be nice for them to know that you've gotten the email, you acknowledge it, so it doesn't hang in the ether and they're wondering, did she even get the email? So I always try and do that, to make people feel that they're important and that I received the inquiry or request, and that, I will get back to them if it doesn't have an immediate response.
and that's very important, right? Because it's something we undermine and we often don't fully appreciate the responsiveness. So that somebody says, "Okay, this is being thought about. I will have a response within X time. I don't have to worry about did she get it? Did she not get it? Did it go to spam? Did it? Is she
Yeah,
traveling? Right?
right.
Like that's why it's so important."
And then with clients, like, they don't want to necessarily forward an email and say, "Did you get it?" Because they might be like, "Oh, I wonder if this is going to cost me. Like, is it going to be another point one or another, whatever?" Like, legal is expensive.
For sure.
When you're running a business, like, you want your money for the business, and you want to be as efficient as possible with legal. So just trying to understand that and go back. I mean, for some clients, everything's urgent, and you have to kind of manage around that and kind of, temper their expectations. And there are ways to do that, I think. And then other clients really only do say something's urgent when it's urgent. But I think all clients like to be acknowledged, even if something, you're going to go back to them in a week or in 2 or 3 days. And so responsiveness, I think, is a key. Work discipline and responsiveness are keys to being successful, and building relationships. And so all three are things I kind of do naturally, which is great.
So, Leila, there will be many young women out there, whether it's their associates, whether they are in law school, or perhaps even undergrad, that say, "I want to be Leila when I grow up."
Oh, I don't know about that.
And grow up in the sense that you're still young and still the sort of the you've had some career path, but at the same time, they want to see, okay, what is Leila doing so that I can be set up for success like Leila is doing.
Yeah.
So, what advice would you have for those women?
I would say don't be afraid of taking risks. Surround yourself with people who value you, who believe in you. Having the right people around you is essential. Sometimes I haven't had the right people around me, and that was not helpful to my career or to my development. I also think people should do what's natural for them. So if someone feels awkward at a networking event, they shouldn't try and push themselves to be super social and extroverted at a networking event. They can show up, but they can, maybe chat with one or two people. They can write an article. They can attend a course. They can do other things to develop profile or to gather skills. There's not one way to be successful. I also think if they're working in a firm and they're a bit more shy or introverted, and they're worried about work opportunities, they can really speak to their mentor about that. They should have a mentor ascribed to them. Many times they have an informal mentor too, and they should say, can you walk me around, or can you try and solicit work for me? Or no one's going to take as much of an interest in your career as you. Someone told me that when I was a lot younger, and it's very true, and I always say it. So you have to be in charge, and you have to kind of um, solicit and get people to help you blossom in the way that makes sense for you. So I never think it's a good idea to try and push yourself to be someone you're not. But I think look at your strengths, look at your goals, plan it out, think about it when it's quiet and no one's around, and then try and do things that will help you get on the path to achieving that goal. And think about why you want to. Be a lawyer. Like maybe the reasons aren't the right reasons, and maybe law is not right for you. I've had mentees that have thought that they want to go to law school, but when we finish our program together through U of T, we realized something else might be better suited for them, like journalism or other things, right? Because law is not a profession to go into if your goal is just to, make a lot of money, or it's something that is not true to actually what the work is going to be day to day, because it's a very hard gig. Like it's not easy, and certainly it becomes painful if it's not your passion. So I just try and always remind people to think about what they're passionate about and to work towards um, their goals in a way that's natural to them. And there's lots of ways to do that. And there's lots of books and resources. Like Delee From has a ton of books and resources about, um, being female and going into law. And she is a lawyer, and she's a neurologist, and she's an author and a coach. Like there are very good resources out there that will allow you to stay true to who you are and develop a profile and hopefully, a career that's meaningful to you.
Thank you, Leila. There are a lot of good pieces of advice there for any listeners. So,
I hope so.
one thing that I'd be curious to get your take on is we know that the legal space has evolved and will continue to evolve, perhaps even faster with the advancements in technology that we're
For
seeing
sure.
culturally. Where do you see the sort of the legal industry being 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of advancement, including on diversity and inclusion and equity, and that's changed things. I think AI is a thing that all the firms are thinking about and testing with. Obviously, it has the capability or capacity to change some of the work that we do in terms of research or memos or work that younger or more junior people may be doing. I think brand is really important. So I think, law firms will always have to stand behind their brand. And so they'll always have to be people working on things and double checking things. So I don't think AI will replace lawyers. Like I know that's been in the paper. And I think AI may supplement um, a law firm's capabilities, but I think we'll always need people thinking about things and problem solving. But I do think, there can be efficiencies in law. One of my one of my friends from law school is one of the people that first came forward with the legal software business, like that reviews contracts and looks for things, and that became really, really popular after she created her company and it was bought by Deloitte. And so that changed the industry a bit as well, where we had software providers doing an initial check of a contract and looking for things, and then we have a student or young lawyer checking the contract. So I think the law industry will have to continue to evolve. It may not want to at times, but it will have to, just to stay relevant. And as if one or two firms do something, all the other firms have to kind of get in line, because we're all operating in the same market. Some of us access the mid market easier than others, but I think we're all thinking about the same things. And AI is a reality that we're going to have to get used to and incorporate into our business in a way that makes sense, that doesn't affect our brand. But I think we'll always need lawyers. I mean, I hope so, because I'd like to always have a job.
I was at an AI talk last night with a professor, an academic that has really contributed a lot to industry, Leila, and it's really uh, all the indications are that the AI is predictive, but judgment is still at the human level. So
Yeah, judgment is exactly.
and the because we have judgment, it's what differentiates us, and
Yeah, it's very lucky that our we have we have that, because it still gives us that one up of anything that we're able to create or do. But I do think it can be used in a way that can increase efficiencies for sure. Like, it's not something we can ignore, but it's not going to replace lawyers. Particularly, I think more junior lawyers have been worried about, oh, what happens to all their work? Like, we still need them, and so that
100%.
won't change.
So, Leila, I do want us to end with a few what we call rapid fire questions, which are just fun and sort of first word that comes to mind for.
Okay,
So, what is your favorite word?
yellow,
I love it. What word do you hate?
roadblock,
What word do you have a hard time pronouncing, if any?
vulnerability,
I love it. You had no trouble. What is your favorite word in another language, if any?
mercy.
Yeah, merci. Which also means thank you in Farsi for all the listeners.
Thank you, Gary. I thought you would say that.
How many languages can you speak?
Two,
And one word to describe yourself.
tenacious.
And if I may say so, very accurate.
I'm sure there's other words people would use, but I prefer tenacious.
And
But
it's
it
true.
gets the point across.
Leila, I have so many questions I wanted to ask you and so many more things we could talk about. I think that we'll probably have to do an encore to this podcast just so
Yeah,
that.
I would love that. I love spending time with you, Gary, and I really respect the business that you've built and your relationships with many, many people. And so I feel so connected to you always. You're like family to me. So anytime.
No, and you know what's nice about this is so many people know you in the industry, but sometimes it's hard to get an aspect like this where it's you get to know somebody a bit more intimately. It's
A bit more personal.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure. For
yeah.
sure. I was grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you for your time today.
Of course.